50 Saiyans versus 50 Viltrumites. Which of these two warrior races would win a fight if they were to ever come to blows? A lot of people like to trivialize this matchup by adding people like Goku, Vegeta, Broly, and I'm like, come on, that's not what the question is asking. 50 Saiyans versus 50 Viltrumites. The averages of both races in a battle to the death. Who would win? So if I haven't made it obvious enough, I'm gonna be using characters like King Vegeta, Thrag, Conquest, Bardock, those type of Saiyans and Viltrumites. I think this matchup is a little bit interesting because of the similarities between both races. And hey, Death Battle did their thing a while back, so at least I'll get to address that, kinda. You guys might think this is a wash matchup, and to that I say that there's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the average Saiyan's power level. That's something we're going to be discussing today as well. Because I hate to break it to you, not every Saiyan is like King Vegeta or Bardock. And as for the Viltrumites, I'd say pretty much all of them are on the table, plus an additional 13 to make it an even 50. So if this matchup sounds interesting to you, then I would implore you to subscribe to the channel. We post content like this every week, plus shorts, and plus we stream on top of that. So I'm really on that grind. We also have some more Invincible content coming up next week in the coming months. So if you're a fan of Invincible especially, then I implore you to stick around. We're going to be covering the IP for a little bit at least. Plus Dragon Ball. Everyone loves Dragon Ball. So with the rules and stipulations pretty much established and laid out, let's get into the topic that you clicked the video to find out. Viltrumites are pretty much the top dogs of the Invincible universe, with the only real competition being like Battle Beasts, who's Battle Beasts, as well as like genetically modified experiments. So it's safe to say they're a big deal. They're so powerful that by the start of the main series, despite there being less than 50 fully blooded Viltrumites left in existence, they still pretty much run through the entire universe like a playground, destroying entire civilizations and the planet's life as, you know, they see fit. Obviously, in the ranks of the super warrior race, we have some pretty big fish, with Omni-Man, Conquest, and Thrag for the most part representing the upper echelons of strength within the Viltrum Empire. I want to emphasize, especially Thrag. But before we get to see him, seeing as how for the situation, we're going to be giving Viltrum the 37 members of its race that were stated to be around during the events of the main series, plus an extra 13 to make it an even 50. And I'm just going to assume that these extra 13 would be like relative statutes to the lower end of the 37, seeing as how presumably only the strongest were able to survive the Scourge virus. Like, I don't think there's 13 Thrag level characters that happen to have died before the series, started. That would be pretty weird. But with that out of the way, how strong is one average Viltrumite? And well, the series tells us, like, pretty verbatim as well, but I'm not gonna get to that just yet, as I gotta get this video to 10 minutes somehow. I'm also gonna be mostly sticking to the comic scaling for the series, but that will not stop me from utilizing animated clips for reference, because I think watching keyframes of comic book panels for the next 4 to 5 minutes might make the thing a little boring. I mean, who do you guys think I am? Amazon Prime? Can't wait for some of you guys to defend the trillion-dollar company in my comments, by the way. Anyways, though, starting with some minor things, Mark was shown to be able to survive the Mauler twins' nuclear explosion at near point-blank range. This is notable because said blast was potent enough to produce the largest solar flare in history. Solar flares are a real phenomenon, and they typically release 10 to the 26 power amount of joules, which is equivalent to 23 petatons of TNT. That is enough raw power to destroy multiple continents. Keep in mind, the same Mark that performed this feat is a character who Cecil and Donald believe only might be able to beat Anissa. And keep in mind, their only real gauge of her up to this point is just her barely trying against Mark. Like, congratulations, Mark, you can probably beat a female Viltrumite who's barely bloodlusted. So, most Viltrumites should presumably be able to endure such levels as Mark did. But that's enough stalling right now. Let's just get to what the comic itself says. Spoilers, by the way. As after the Viltrumite War, which resulted in the planet of Viltrum being in ruins, Thrag basically moves the remaining population to Earth. Because as it turns out, human DNA is pretty compatible with the Viltrumite race. But during the negotiation process of this event, Thrag, the Grand Regent and de facto leader of the Empire, states that all of the remaining 37 of them would be enough to tear the planet apart. Assuming this feat is seamless and takes around 5 seconds, each independent Viltrumite would be contributing anywhere between 61 exatons to even as high as 31 zetatons of energy. Not a bad level of power, seeing as how the low end is still enough to destroy a moon, and the high end is enough to destroy a small planet, to even average sized planet at best. That's a pretty good gauge for Viltrumites in my opinion, but there are some wanked high end calcs that assume that they're tearing the planet apart and separating each chunk by a distance relative to the diameter of the planet. That would yield around 125 kilotons per Viltrumite. That's a little bit of a high end in my opinion, as that's enough power to destroy something like Jupiter. But seeing as how we only get this scaling chain via a statement, it's kind of hard to assert any truth to the higher end calc. Like, I believe Thrag is right that they can tear the planet apart, but I don't think there's any real good evidence to suggest that they would be able to tear the Earth that far apart. So it's better to just stay at those lower ends, which would still get these guys anywhere between moon to planetary. Some people might want to vouch for these guys being higher by using the previously mentioned destruction of Viltrum as a feat in quotes by the way, as it arguably doesn't scale to anyone, as it involved the main cast using a gun powerful enough to one-shot any one of them, to weaken a core that they would have died if they tried to hit independently. And after that, these guys had to run away from the explosion so they wouldn't die in it, so let's just stop using that for you guys. But anyways, Moon to Planetary is not a bad gauge. Obviously, with that being said, top tiers like Nolan and Conquest would just scale into these planetary ranges but a little bit deeper, and then you have Thrag, who's pretty much in a league of his own. So moving on to speed, all these guys are pretty comparable. So in order to find some type of way to quantify said speed, the best way is just to utilize a feat that comes to us from Alan the Alien, who was able to confirm from the edge of the solar system to the planet Earth in a time frame of 12 minutes. I want to point out that Alan is confirmed to have comparable travel speed to his combat and reaction stuff, so the metrics that I'm about to lay out would scale to how fast he can dodge or throw a punch. And it's been determined that he can fly at speeds that would range anywhere between 24 times the speed of light to even as high as 2300 times the speed of light. Once again, there are a lot of people that like to use an instance of Omni-Man flying to another galaxy in the time frame of a week or two, but the thing with Viltrumites and their flight speed feats is that they have the ability to kind of warp space to make their own hyperspace portal jumps. So they can cross these huge interstellar distances via time dilation. So using some of their feats is a little risky. So hopefully you can see why I just used Alan's feat, which is more concrete and is stated verbatim to be comparable to how fast he can throw or react to a punch. So in conclusion, these guys would range anywhere between Moon to Planetary, and they would have speed ranging anywhere from faster than the speed of light to massively faster than the speed of light. So we'll see how that compares to our Saiyans. Honestly, power scaling these guys is relatively simple. Obviously, they are separated in classes and ranks, with the power between these groups varying pretty drastically, as we have super elite warriors being able to one-shot upper middle class warriors, and lower class Saiyans just being seen as trash by the two other previously mentioned classes. So it's best to start with the weakest class and just work our way up. I'm going to be talking about the race as we know it pre-Dragon Ball Super Retcon, so no granola, Dragon Ball Minus, Broly film, none of that stuff over here. And no Super Saiyan Bardock, obviously. We're mostly going to just stick to how the race was presented in the Z era, but I will touch up on how using the newer versions would work in a matchup like this, probably in the conclusion portion of this video. I'm also going to be using both the Z anime as well as the manga, because Toriyama has gone on record to say that the anime and manga are pretty much the same continuity for the most part, and he refers to that as like the canon. So honestly, a lot of the stuff is on the table for us to use. Well, seeing as how early Dragon Ball utilizes a system of power levels, we can hop right into the inverse to kind of answer our first question. And once again, it comes to us from Z Filler. As during the preparation arc where the Earthlings are training for Vegeta and Nappa's arrival, they have to fight against Phantom Saiyans, which are stated to have half the power of the average Saiyan. and they get bullied pretty hard at first. This is before their training is complete, so their power levels here would be closer to how they initially started. Utilizing the highest known confirmed level of the group being Tien with a respectable 250, we can kind of just double that, seeing as how the Phantoms are said to be half that of an actual Saiyan, meaning that the average Saiyan during the prime of the Empire would at least have a power level of 500 plus. This is very impressive, as Piccolo, while weighted and having a power level of around 322, was able to destroy the moon and cause the celestial body to blow up so violently that the subsequent blast was found to be equivalent to large planet levels of power. And once again, this is a casual ki blast from a character that the average Saiyan using the previous method would upscale nearly 2 times over. But we also have Roshi's Moonbus, which was also founded to cause a large planet level explosion, and he had a power level of like 180. So using that method, any one of our Saiyans would have large planetary AP. We can make this estimate even higher, as there is a scan that states that the bare minimum power level required to join the Frieza Force would be equivalent to a battle level of like 1200. Saiyans should count because they work for him, so you can just add that logic to say that low class warriors are 1200. I don't think this method is too consistent, as that would mean that low level warriors would be relative to Raditz, who is considered to be an upper mid class Saiyan, so I think the estimate of around 500 is a lot more consistent, to be fair. But seeing as how they have a lot of stuff that they just upscale as a baseline, is that really a bad thing? I'm gonna skip the mid-class, analysis, because they just upscale the last group, and that's pretty much all they're scaling. And I also want to talk about the super elite warriors, being King Vegeta, his son the Prince, and maybe Bardock by the end of the special, as by the start of the original film, he had a power level nearing 10,000. And by the end of the film, he's able to box with Dodoria while bloodlusted. You might be confused as to why I'm showing a Dragon Ball Z Kakarot level, because this is where that instance draws from, but fear not, as it's explicitly stated that the filler in this game is canon to the OG 90s Toei continuity. So as far as I'm concerned, this interaction here is canon. This is impressive, as he had a power level of 18,000 but lower than 24,000. So using this method, Bardock may have actually been the strongest Saiyan in history pre-Namek Saga, meaning that he'd upscale the king and his son, who can triple planet bust with the wave of their movements and blow up planets to a star level yield with the point of a finger. So low class Saiyans are on that large planetary range, upper mid class are just somewhat above that, and the super elite warriors reach those dwarf star to just baseline star level ranges of attack potency. As for speed now, the lower class warriors would upscale a lot of the FTL feats from the OG Dragon Ball series. Like Roshi's Moonbus is already relativistic, and we have King Piccolo, who's able to fire a laser which is said to be lower than his physicals. We know that in Dragon Ball, speed and AP are directly correlated, so if Piccolo's laser light attack is weaker than him, it's slower than his base movements as well. And that's a guy that had a power level of 210, if I remember correctly. But moving to the upper tier Saiyans is when the crazy speed end starts to really kick in, as we have King Kai, who had a power level of 3500, being able to perceive and telepathically communicate with spaceships moving at interstellar speeds, as he was able to track the Saiyans coming to Earth and Goku on his way to Namek, granting him faster than light to massively faster than light, like processing and perception speeds. And that guy is weaker than Nappa, so it gets pretty insane. But I haven't even talked about the Azaro state, as all of these guys can utilize their tails to become great apes, which grants them a 10 times multiplier method to all of their power stats, being speed and AP. So suddenly even the weakest Saiyans have a power level of 5,000, which is above Nappa in their Azaro states. Nappa's a guy who can literally no cell sitting down in a triple planet bus explosion, and the speed scaling stuff is just from King Kai. And on top of that, we have the super elites in their Azaro states ranging anywhere between 100,000 to 200k, making the higher echelons of this class stronger than every Ginyu Force member. Not bad overall for a bunch of monkeys. So with the stats of both of our factions laid out, between 50 average Viltrumites and 50 Saiyans, who would win in a fight? And with it all laid out like that, it honestly turned out to still be a wash. I was really relying on the ambiguity of the average Saiyan power level not being that high to kind of make this matchup a little comparable at least. But I'm gonna put it like this: if the Viltrumites were in the Dragon Ball Z universe with their AP around like just baseline planetary, they'd all have power levels ranging anywhere from like 100 to like 180 max. like max, and that's only Thrag. So to put this matchup into perspective, we have two groups, with one group's weakest member probably being stronger than the strongest of the other members group. So it's not looking good for the Viltrumites, it's not looking good at all. And while it's clear that using the Z-era Saiyans would just make this matchup a wash, how would the newer post-retcon Saiyans perform under these circumstances? And well, for starters, Bardock just gets a massive amp as he gets this Super Saiyan S form against Gas, with Gas being a character who says that no Saiyan ever could beat him. His very presence just represents a bar or benchmark that no one of the race could ever hope to be comparable to. So Bardock in this state is just the strongest Saiyan in history. Using King Vegeta as like a baseline and assuming he had a power level of like, I don't know, like 15,000, and then multiplying that by 10 to account for his Azaro state, and Bardock just being stronger than him here. So new era Bardock in this state is probably like 100k at least, and he can presumably multiply that by 10, via his Azaro state, assuming he can stack that on top of whatever form he got here. And then all of a sudden, we have a guy whose power level is like reaching 1,000,000. And honestly, once it gets to that point, all the other Saiyans have a power level of like 1. Bardock is just gonna carry the whole squad with like medium difficulty. So whether you utilize the Z era or the Super era of Saiyans, both sides would come out on top in a conflict against the Viltrumite Empire, as today's winners are the Saiyan race. So yeah, Death Battle, you guys really fumbled. I know it's been a minute, and y'all probably heard it, but come on. Like, you see these stats? How do you mess this up? But yeah, anyways, that was the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Whatever you thought, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. Maybe there's some secret Viltrumite Empire, like solar system meta that I need to be told about. Maybe this whole video is wrong, right? If so, comment it down below. But if that doesn't interest you, that's okay, as we'll be back next week with another long formatted video such as this. But until then, stay big, G fans.